What if your home became another country overnight? What if the street you were born on was redrawn by a stranger's pen, without warning, without your name? In 1947, a single line split the Indian subcontinent and changed millions of lives forever. Families were divided, cities were renamed, and silence fell where laughter once lived. This is not just a history lesson. It's a story of missing letters, unanswered prayers, and friendships torn by borders. And somewhere in all of it, there are voices still waiting to be heard. Watch until the very end, because the final chapter might change how you see the present. Leave your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more stories that history tried to forget. They didn't know that in just a few weeks their street would belong to another country. Before the lines were drawn, before the flags changed, before the trains ran empty and silent, there was peace. Not perfect peace, but the kind born of habit, history, and human rhythm. In the northern cities of the British Raj, Lahore, Amritsar, Delhi, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians lived side by side. They shared chai on doorsteps. They celebrated weddings with fireworks and color. They sold spices in the same markets, bargained with the same merchants. They borrowed sugar from each other. They prayed under different roofs, but under the same sky. And for generations, it worked. But something had shifted, and most people didn't even notice. In the summer of 1947, strange things began to happen. Posters appeared on walls overnight, in languages not everyone could read. Men began to whisper in alleyways. A neighbor suddenly stopped speaking to another. Someone crossed the street and didn't wave back. One morning, the butcher closed early. The next day, the tailor's shop didn't open at all. And then came the rumors. Not loud, not shouted, just whispers, like wind before a monsoon. They're dividing the land. We'll be forced to leave. Something is coming. Most brushed it off. After all, they'd lived together for centuries. How could a border drawn by strangers in London change that? But in one small house in Punjab, a father stood in his doorway, watching the horizon with narrowed eyes. He could feel it in the air, like the tension before a lightning strike. He didn't know it yet, but the street he stood on, where his children played, where his ancestors were buried, would soon belong to another country. And nothing would ever be the same. The man with the pen. He had never been to India. He didn't speak the languages. He didn't know the rivers, the temples, the graves, but he was asked to divide 400 million people in 35 days. His name was Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer, quiet, methodical, known more for tax cases than maps. In July of 1947, he stepped off a plane in Delhi. He was given a task no one envied, and no one truly understood. Draw a border, where there had never been one. They called it the Radcliffe Line, but it wasn't a line, it was a blade. He was told to divide provinces like Punjab and Bengal, where Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and others had lived together for generations, into two nations, India and Pakistan. But there were no satellite images, no real data, just outdated maps, political pressure, and silence. Radcliffe was given no time to visit the villages, no time to consult the people whose homes and lives hung in the balance, and perhaps worst of all, he had to work in secret. The final maps would be revealed after independence, so that by the time anyone knew where the lines were drawn, it would be too late to run. Imagine that. You wake up one morning thinking you're in India. By nightfall, you're in Pakistan. Your neighbors, now foreigners. Your house, now across a border. The pen in Radcliffe's hand didn't just move across paper. It moved through hearts, villages, graveyards, and childhoods. and it cut deep. Some say he wept when he finished. He refused his salary, and within hours of submitting his final draft, Radcliffe boarded a plane and left the country forever. He never returned, he never spoke of the border again. But behind him, the ground had already begun to shake. Because when the line was announced, villages woke up to find themselves on the wrong side. And millions of people would now be told, "You don't belong here anymore." Brothers divided. They were born on the same street, learned to walk on the same dirt, shared the same mango tree, the same mischief, the same monsoons. But now, a line no one could see was about to split their world in two. His name was Arjun, son of a Hindu merchant. His best friend was Rahim, son of a Muslim calligrapher. Their fathers drank tea together every evening. Their mothers helped deliver each other's children. And the boys? They were inseparable. They played cricket barefoot, snuck into the cinema through the back, lit lamps together at Diwali, and shared sweets after Ramadan. In their world, religion was flavor, not fire. But now the flame had arrived. It started with a whisper. Rahim's uncle said it first. "This is Muslim land now. Tell Arjun's family they should leave." A week later, Arjun's cousin came from Delhi, his voice trembling. "They say Muslims are planning something. You need to be ready." Then came the posters, the rumors, and then the silence. Rahim stopped knocking on Arjun's door. Arjun stopped going near Rahim's alley. No fights, no words, just distance. Not physical, emotional. Worse than violence, the loss of trust. And then came the announcement. Their village, once just home, was now officially part of Pakistan. Arjun's family had 3 days to leave. Rahim watched them pack from his rooftop. He wanted to run down, to help, to carry a box, say goodbye, do something. But he didn't move. Neither did Arjun. Their eyes met once, across the courtyard. It lasted seconds. But in those seconds lived a lifetime. Laughter, secrets, midnight games, and the pain of a question that neither dared ask out loud. Are we still brothers? If the world says we're enemies? The truck pulled away, dust rose, and Arjun was gone. Rahim turned away and whispered something to no one. And from that day forward, he never stepped into that side of the street again. The train to nowhere. It looked like any other train. Steel wheels, wooden benches, a whistle that cried like a mourning bird. But this one carried more than passengers. It carried hope and fear, and everything they couldn't leave behind. August 1947. The railway station in Amritsar is packed beyond capacity. Mothers clutch children. Fathers carry bags of wheat, photos, prayer books. Old men hold soil wrapped in cloth, earth from the courtyard they built with their hands. Everyone's leaving something, but no one knows what they're going toward. The trains had no names, just signs, to Lahore, to Delhi. Eastbound, westbound. But sometimes they stopped arriving. At first, people said it was delays. Then, confusion. But then came the truth. Entire trains were disappearing. One arrived in Lahore, doors shut tight, not a sound inside. When they were opened, silence. No cries, no footsteps, just dust and unanswered questions. Word spread like wildfire. The ghost trains, metal coffins that crossed borders but not safely. And yet, people still boarded. Why? Because staying behind no longer felt safe either. On one of those platforms stood Meena, 23, wrapped in her mother's shawl. She held a bundle. Inside, her baby brother. And on her wrist, a string tied by her Sikh neighbor. He had whispered, "It will keep you safe." He had tears in his eyes. She never saw him again. As the train pulled away, Mina watched the station fade into a blur. She didn't wave. No one did. There was no one left to wave to. Hours passed. The train rumbled through dry fields, forests, empty outposts. At night, the passengers whispered prayers. Some held hands with strangers. Others just stared out into the darkness. And when the train stopped suddenly in the middle of nowhere, no one dared ask why. A moment. 2. Then it moved again. No explanation. But everyone felt it. The breath held inside the train, and the knowledge that not all trains continued moving. Mina arrived, but others didn't. And even today, in the borderlands of Punjab, old men sit beside tracks and whisper, "That train. It never came. It vanished." Like so many things that year, the river that remembered. Rivers don't forget. They carry memories in their current, in their mud, in the things we try to wash away. They called it Satluj. In ancient times, Shatadru, the 100-streamed one. A river as old as the Rig Veda itself. It wound through Punjab like a silver ribbon, feeding crops, quenching thirst, blessing prayers. But in the summer of 1947, the river changed. Villagers along the banks began to notice things. At first, it was the silence. Fewer boats. No weddings on the water. No music echoing across the current. Then, strange things in the reeds. A sari tangled in roots. A leather shoe lodged in the mud. A baby's rattle floating downstream. And finally, the smoke. An old man named Harbhajan, keeper of a small riverside shrine, swept the steps every morning with devotion. But one day, he stopped, not because his broom broke, but because the river spoke. Not in words, but in what it carried. Ash, scorched wood, and a half-burned page from a prayer book. One line still visible. "O Ganga, carry our sins away." But this wasn't the Ganges. And these weren't sins. They were lives. Harbhajan sat on the ghat and stared at the water. He had lived through wars, famines, floods, but nothing like this. "The river," he whispered, "has learned to mourn." On the other side of the border, just 40 miles away, a young girl named Nazma stood barefoot at the edge of the same water. She had crossed into Pakistan with her grandmother, walking for 6 days. No father, no mother, only silence. She carried a copper bowl. Not for water, for a ritual. Her grandmother showed her how to release marigolds into the current, a tradition from the old village. But as the flowers floated, Nazma watched them swirl and spin unnaturally, as if caught by invisible hands, then disappear beneath the surface. She didn't cry. She simply asked, "Does the river know where we lived before?" People began to speak of the river differently. They said it had memory now, that it refused to let go, that if you listened closely at dawn, you could hear it whispering names. Some brought offerings. Some came to curse. Some just stood in silence, afraid of what they might remember. Years later, when roads were repaired and temples rebuilt, one reporter asked a survivor why he never returned to his village. The man replied, "Because the river still knows what I did to survive." He didn't explain further. He didn't have to. The river understood. The village with no flag. When the sun rose, it was still the same sky, the same cows, the same prayer bell in the distance. But the map had changed, and no one had told them. The village was called Gulabwala, a small dot between wheat fields and dust, too small to matter to cartographers, too far from rail lines to attract soldiers, No post office, no school. Just 32 mud houses, one banyan tree, and a well that hadn't run dry in years. And yet, it ended up on the wrong side of the border. The people of Gulabwala didn't know it at first. No one arrived with guns. No one raised a flag. The change came quietly. A merchant from the next town stopped visiting. The letter from a cousin in Amritsar never arrived. And then, one day, the traveling priest didn't show up for the festival. Instead came a stranger, a government man in a crisp white kurta, holding a rolled-up paper and a tired expression. He pinned a notice to the banyan tree. Didn't answer questions. Didn't stay for tea. By nightfall, the elders had gathered with lanterns. They read the notice aloud. It said, "Gulabwala is now within the jurisdiction of the Dominion of Pakistan. The people shall be given an opportunity to relocate if they so choose." There was a silence no one knew how to break. One woman whispered, "Relocate? But where?" Another asked, "And what about the graves?" No one had answers. Over the next week, uncertainty spread like dust on the wind. Some families packed, some stayed, some walked to the next village hoping for clarity, and returned with more confusion. There were no buses, no guards, no line in the sand, just doubt. What was India? What was Pakistan? And if the land looked the same, why did everything feel different? A young boy named Iqbal, barely 10, stood at the well one morning. He looked at his grandfather and asked, "If we stay here, are we betraying someone?" The old man sighed. "No, Beta, we are only staying where we were born." But that night the old man didn't sleep. He stared at the stars, wondering if they too had chosen a side. By the end of the month, half the village had left. The others remained, suspended between two nations, with no borders, no guarantees, and no flag to wave, just the wind, the well, and a map they would never see. The road of dust and promises. They walked without maps, without soldiers, without certainty. Only the direction they were told led to home. The sun was not yet up when the caravan moved. Over 200 people, farmers, weavers, widows, children, some on ox carts, most on foot. The dust rose behind them like a silent curtain, hiding the fields they would never see again. They had packed what they could carry: clothes, grain, utensils, a few framed photographs, but what weighed most was what they'd left behind. At the front walked a man named Prem, carrying a rolled mat and a rusted lantern. His wife, Sarla, held their daughter's hand. The girl, Neela, age 6, kept asking the same question: "When will we reach India?" Prem didn't answer because he didn't know. The border wasn't marked by signposts or flags, only by rumor, and rumor had teeth. Every village they passed seemed emptied too quickly. Doors hanging open. Fires left burning. Rice scattered as if someone dropped it while fleeing. Some homes were untouched, others bore scars. Blackened walls, shattered pots, silence. Neela asked, "Why did they leave food behind?" Sarla only tightened her grip and whispered, "Keep walking." By the third day, the heat became a character of its own, pressing, watching, punishing. Children grew quiet. Elders began to stumble. The wheels of the cart cracked with the dryness of the earth. But no one turned back, because behind them was uncertainty, and ahead, a promise. One night, they camped beneath a tree that bore no fruit. Someone lit a fire. Someone began to sing. Softly, a lullaby from the old village. Others joined, their voices hoarse but united. In that moment, the road disappeared. Only memory remained. On the 5th day, the caravan split. Half took the left path, toward the station, the others toward the river crossing. Prem hesitated. A man nearby said, "Left is faster." but riskier. Another whispered, "Right has a longer way, but it's safer." They looked at one another. Then Prem nodded toward the river. Neela clutched her mother's arm and asked again, "Papa, when will we be in India?" Prem finally answered, "When the ground feels like it knows our names." She didn't understand, but she smiled anyway. Because even when nations collapse, a parent's voice can still feel like a country. Some of those who chose the station were never heard from again. Others arrived weeks later, thinner, quieter, older in their eyes. And a very few, returned to the road the way they had come, not with belongings, but with news. The temple and the mosque. The village had two landmarks, a temple, whitewashed and bright, and a mosque, shaded by neem trees. They stood across from each other, like two palms pressed in prayer. Pakya for decades, the people of Rampur walked between them freely. On Fridays, the call to prayer would echo from the minaret. On festival days, temple bells would ring through the morning, and no one complained. Children ran between courtyards, men shared water from the same brass pot, and elders nodded in peace as they passed. Heads covered, hands folded. It was not perfect, but it worked. Until the world broke. After the partition was announced, the village began to speak in fragments. Some whispered about revenge, others about survival, and many about leaving. But no one touched the temple, no one defaced the mosque. Not at first. Then one morning the imam found red powder on the steps of the mosque. That evening, a garland of marigolds appeared at the temple gate, wilted, soaked in something that wasn't rain. No one said a word, but everyone felt it. The air had shifted. The two friends who once cared for both shrines, Farooq, the calligrapher, and Mahadev, the oil lamp keeper, no longer spoke. Not out of hate, out of dread. They had shared tea every morning under the neem tree. Now they drank in silence, facing opposite walls. Farooq still lit the mosque lamps. Mahadev still rang the temple bell, but neither looked across the square. On the night of Krishna Janmashtami, Mahadev found the temple gate chained shut. A scrap of paper was tucked between the locks. "Worship is for the free. Choose your side." He read it by moonlight, then folded it slowly and tucked it into his pocket. Not to keep, but because he didn't know what else to do. 2 days later, the imam didn't come to prayer. They found him sitting on the mosque steps, hands still, eyes open but speaking to no one. Someone asked if he was ill. He replied, "I waited for God to protect this place, but maybe He's waiting for us to protect each other." The next Friday, Mahadev walked to the mosque. He carried oil and matches. He placed them quietly by the door, then turned and walked away. Farooq never spoke of it. But the next morning, Mahadev found incense sticks resting on the temple's doorstep, wrapped in cloth, tied with red thread. In time, the village emptied, some to the east, some to the west. But the temple still stands. So does the mosque. And the neem tree between them, it grew taller, as if it, too, was trying to reach toward heaven and remind both sides of a time when faith didn't divide, it belonged. The silence that followed. Some stories are told in voices, others in absences. In the aftermath of partition, not all who crossed the border had names. Some were too young to speak. Others were never seen again. They were the ones who vanished without sound. No records, no graves. Only questions whispered decades later by those who never stopped wondering. There was a child's sandal found beside a railway track in Firozpur. A name written inside, Zoya, in careful Urdu script. No matching records, no reports, just the sandal, just the name. There was a bundle of letters discovered in a burned-out post office in Rawalpindi, all addressed to a girl named Anjali. sealed, unread. The ink still legible, the love still alive. But the return address, long gone, the house no longer stands, the sender never traced. And there were the children at the camp in Ambala. They arrived on foot, eyes hollow but feet steady. Some knew their names, most did not. One girl, maybe 7, clutched a copper spoon. When asked her name, she said only, "I belong to Amma." She sings. But Amma never came. No one did. Years later, the volunteers still remembered her. They called her Gita. Not because they knew, but because they hoped. She grew up with a new family, learned a new script, a new anthem. But sometimes at night she would sit near the window and hum a song no one had taught her. Across the border, a woman named Sophia kept an empty cradle for 6 years. She never remarried, she never moved. When asked why she left the cradle untouched, she said, "Because if I forget how small he was, then it's like he was never here." These aren't just stories, they are gaps in the national memory. Spaces between numbers. Because while headlines told of millions displaced, they didn't mention the faces never found. They didn't speak of the half-said names, the lullabies with no listener, the echoes that never faded. Even today, at partition museums in Delhi and Lahore, there are walls of silence, unmarked boxes, unnamed toys, unfinished letters, and visitors come, stand before them, and whisper names into the air, just in case someone is still listening. The letter that never reached. It was never sealed, never stamped, never delivered, but it held everything he couldn't say. Out loud. He wrote it in the early winter of 1948. A year had passed. The smoke had cleared. The screams had faded. But the silence, that lingering silence, still hung in the corners of the room. His name was Bashir Khan, a schoolteacher from Ludhiana. Now a refugee in Lahore, his wife, Zinat, hadn't spoken in weeks. His son had stopped asking when they were going home, and Bashir had run out of explanations. So one night, beneath a dim kerosene lamp, he took a page from his old attendance ledger and began to write. "Dear Rajan, I don't know where this letter will go. I don't even know if you're alive. But I remember your laugh, the way your voice cracked when you sang, how you sneezed every time we shelled peas. We used to talk of books, of dreams, of our children growing up in the same city. That city is gone. The streets are the same, but they no longer know my footsteps. The chai shop still serves tea, but not in the same hands. I walk past familiar buildings and feel like a stranger. Tell me, old friend, when you closed the door behind me that day, did you know it was the last time? Yours, Bashir." He folded the letters slowly, like a ritual, placed it inside a book of poetry, and never spoke of it again. Years passed. The book moved with him from house to house, shelf to shelf. He taught history to students who had no memory of what had been lost. He taught them about kings and battles, but not about the fire in his own timeline. One day, in his final class before retirement, a boy asked, "Sir, were you alive during the partition?" Bashir paused, then said, "Yes, but part of me never crossed the border." That night he opened the book again. The letter was still there, the ink slightly faded, but the words still breathing. He read it aloud. Not for Rajan. For himself. For the version of him that never got to say goodbye. The fence between brothers. They hadn't seen each other in 40 years. Not since the day one walked east and the other stayed behind. But the memory was never further than an arm's length and a border fence. It was 1988. An experimental peace initiative had opened a footpath along the Wagah border for families separated by partition to meet. For 5 minutes, under armed supervision through wire. Among the crowd stood Surinder Singh, 72, a retired postmaster from Amritsar. He wore his best kurta, pressed turban, and a photograph in his pocket. A faded image of two teenage boys laughing, one with his arm slung over the other. The boy beside him? His cousin, Abdul Wahid, last seen in 1947. On the other side of the fence in Pakistan, Abdul stood quietly, the same sharp cheekbones, same tired eyes. He held no photo, just a walking cane and a trembling hand. They approached the wire. Neither smiled, not out of anger, but because 40 years of silence cannot be broken in 5 minutes. They said nothing at first. Then Surinder spoke. "You still walk like our uncle." Abdul looked down, laughed softly. "You still talk too much." A moment, then both men put their fingers through the links of the fence, touching barely. Not hands, but recognition. Abdul pulled something from his pocket, a small copper coin, green with age. "You gave this to me the night you left," he said. "You said it would bring luck." Surinder blinked hard. "I thought I lost it." "You did," Abdul whispered. "I kept it for both of us." A whistle blew. Time was up. The guards called out, not unkindly, but firmly. Neither man moved. They looked, just looked, as if to memorize every wrinkle, every freckle. Finally, Surinder said, "I was angry at you for staying." Abdul replied, "I was angry at you for leaving." Then, together, "But I never stopped missing you." They stepped back. The crowd moved on. But behind them, 2 small coins lay buried in the dirt, one from each side. Left there together, where the fence couldn't reach. What the children remember. Time does not erase, it rewrites, softens edges, but leaves the ink. In a classroom in Delhi, a boy stands before a map of India. He hesitates, then asks, "Was Lahore always in Pakistan?" The teacher pauses, not because she doesn't know the answer, but because she remembers the train her grandmother never spoke of. Across the border in Karachi, a girl finds a small tin box in her grandfather's trunk. Inside, a torn page from a Gurmukhi book, a faded wedding photo, and a newspaper clipping from August 14, 1947. She asks, "Nana, were we always from here?" He smiles gently. "We were always from somewhere, and now we are here, so this is also ours." The children of partition were not born into fire, but they walk on its ashes. They grow in its shadow. Some grow with silence. Some grow with stories. Most grow with questions. And sometimes they go looking. In 2019, a group of students from both nations met at a virtual history exchange. They spoke of textbooks, of temples and trains, of silence, and of too many names. Then one student asked, "What do we do with all this pain?" A pause. Then another replied, "Maybe we don't carry it. Maybe we listen to it and lay it down." In Amritsar, a boy plants a neem tree beside the Gurdwara where his great-grandfather once prayed. In Lahore, a girl lights a candle at the steps of an old Hindu temple, long silent. Neither calls it activism. Neither calls it history. They just say, "This belonged to someone, so I'll take care of it now." Not everything is healed. Not everything is remembered. But someone, somewhere, is still whispering names, and someone else is finally listening. This was the story of a border. But more than that, it was the story of those who crossed it and of those who never did. It is not over, because stories like these don't end. They are handed forward. Thank you for walking this journey with us. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe, and help us bring more voices from the shadows into the light.